tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and it shall and you shall eat the herbs of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. And you know, I think sometimes we forget that how wonderful the earth was during the time of the garden, and then because of sin, how not only did mankind fall, but the earth fell with it. And I think that's a lot of what we continue to see is that yearning for redemption. Joseph, would you go to the next slide, please? And we had this verse from Luke chapter 21, verse 25 last week, and it said, There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. And of course, this is in Luke chapter 21, and that is Luke's version of the Olivet Discord, where the disciples were asking about the end times, and this is part of the explanation given. And of course, I've added Romans 8 and 22 to that for today, and it says, For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pains together until now. You know, everything is yearning for that day of redemption. And I believe that we're seeing that with more and more frequency. Some of the weather events, this is quite breathtaking. It's lightning from the Agua volcano in Guatemala. It was a pretty awesome event happened this week. Next slide, Joseph. Of course, massive fires all over the planet. This is one that's been going on in Greece for some time now. Shows the plumes of smoke and whatnot. Yeah, go ahead. This one is in Montana. The headlines read, The Sanders County Sheriff's Department issued a new evacuation information Saturday afternoon for residents and visitors near the River Road East. Fire burning about 12,000 acres near the town of Paradise. Kelowna, British Columbia, there's a huge uncontrolled fire, which is just right across from North Dakota and that area, right across the Canadian border. We know that Canada has been wrought with wildfires throughout the year. This is the Spanish island of Tenerife. Tenerife. It's an island. It's been engulfed in massive wildfires also. Mass evacuations underway. This was about Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. It seems like whatever's not on fire is flooding right now. Rainstorms across Oman. More flash flooding in Italy. You know, in California, I think that's one of the main things that they're worried about, because they're going to get, from what the weather forecasters are saying, they're going to get a year's amount of rain in a 24 to 48 hour period. And they said that in some areas of California would get several years worth of rain in that time period. And they've had wildfires and whatnot, and they're really worried about flash flooding. This is the Frankfurt airport in Frankfurt, Germany this week. Massive rains there flooded the airport. This next slide is the subways in Frankfurt. You can see the water flowing into the subways, flooding the subway systems. And this is from last night. This is in San Rosalia, Baja California, Mexico, just right, as the hurricane's coming up that way. You can see the water running down the middle of the streets and whatnot. You think God's trying to get our attention, folks?
Yeah. And this is actually nothing to what it's going to be.
Absolutely. These are just, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally,
Yeah.
no kind of
It's
pun.
going to be horrendous.
Yes. I've had a lot of people ask me, do you think we're in the tribulation? And then no, I don't. But I used to give a big, long, lengthy explanation, but I've changed that to when we're in the tribulation, you're going to know it.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, if you're here, you'll know.
yeah, you're going to know. Of course, everybody is saying that all of this is because climate change. Um, Pardon?
My mom was just saying that the other day.
Yeah, and I have friends that are the same way, and people, they just don't see it. But this is something that a lot of people have been talking about. Climate emergency declaration. Here comes climate lockdowns. There's a lot of talk about climate lockdowns, similar to the lockdowns that we had during the COVID pandemic. Go ahead, Joseph, to the next slide. President Joe Biden and the UN are likely to declare an official global climate emergency next week. All the signs are there, the chatter, and behind the scenes maneuvering. The UN website has now a climate emergency page. Biden, the other day, stopped short, but when the new temperature numbers are issued on August 15th by NOAA, that may be all the justification Biden needs. The melting in Antarctica and the supposed subsequent sea level rise will be another. And the, how do you all pronounce that? Lahaina in Maui burning to the ground will be cited as yet another. If Biden declares a climate emergency, will lockdowns follow? History suggests yes. In a plausible scenario, we could see gas rationing, restrictions on electricity use, and limits on air travel. Enjoy steaks? Well, you can forget those, according to the article. I think they're seeing the same thing that we're seeing, but they're seeing it from a different perspective. We're seeing it through the lens of the Bible, and they're seeing it through the lens of the world. And
What will they say if they lock down everything and there's no change?
well,
I'm like, say, okay, y'all, we're doing this. Let's see.
no,
It's over.
no, it's. I think,
He's going to bring the end.
yeah, it's gonna. I think we're rapidly approaching that point.
Yes.
Just like we're on a, it's, as my grandpa would say, a rocket sled on rails. Literally heading towards it.
Like, well, it's too late. You waited too long to change.
Yep.
Science will have an excuse.
Oh, they'll have an excuse. They always have an excuse for all of this stuff. They really do. And the sad thing about it is when they give you those excuses, they make absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the truth. They give us, what they call it, word salad, and they have all these reasons and explanations, but they just don't make any sense. If y'all remember this from last week, this was talking about Brazil and the newly elected president of Brazil, and he was calling for a one world government to enforce climate change. That everybody needs to be made accountable if they're not following the new climate regulations and whatnot. It's interesting. I brought this back up not just because of everything that we've been looking at and the weather and whatnot, but because of the next slide. This week, Brazil launched their digital currency. And this was in Prophecy News Watch. It's official that the Brazilian Central Bank has announced the introduction of its CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. It is called DREX. The acronym is for Digital Real Electronic X. And the finished logo reveals the project is in fact quite advanced. And of course, the article goes on to talk about how it's going to work and everything. But it's interesting that he was calling week before last, he was calling for a one world government. And this week they launched their digital currency. Again, folks, everything is happening so quickly. Russia officially launches the digital ruble this week. Actually, the article is dated August 17th, and it says that Russia has officially launched the digital ruble, with it becoming operational from August 1st. This will help Moscow conduct foreign trade in the face of Western sanctions, according to Vladimir Ginko of the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economic and Public Administration. Boy, that's a mouthful. And of course, it says above that, it says a national rollout to all Russians who need digital ruble for use. International transactions is expected by early 2025. At the moment, the Russian government is the only one that are using this. Very similar to the trials that are going on here in the United States with the FedNow system. But everything is increasingly going digital. China cuts U.S. Treasury holdings to a 14-year low amidst persisting security concerns, geopolitical tensions. China cuts its holdings of U.S. Treasuries for a third month in a row in June, reducing its stakes by $11.3 billion down to $835.4 billion. Earlier this month, former central bank advisor Yang Ding called the security of the Chinese holdings an increasingly geopolitical issue. China has been decreasing the amount of debt that they hold in U.S. dollars and bonds. All of this is happening on the eve of the BRICS summit, which is coming up next week in South Africa, in Johannesburg. The BRICS group of major emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, will hold its 15th head of state and government summit in Johannesburg this month. One of the key things that they're going to be talking about, one is they're going to be talking about allowing all these new nations that have applied for membership into the BRICS nations. And the second thing is they're going to try to figure out how they're going to come up with a reserve currency to work with all of these different countries. And I don't know a lot about economics. In fact, I just know the very, very basics. And I'm going to explain this the way that I understand it. And it's very basic. Go ahead with the next slide. First, though, I want to talk about this for just a second. India makes the first crude oil payment to the UAE in Indian rupees. India's Oil Corp made payments to Abu Dhabi's national oil company, according to a statement issued by India's embassy in the UAE. The transaction comes after one involving the sale of 25 kilograms of gold from the UAE gold exporter to a buyer in India at about 128.4 million rupees. The reason that this is all significant is I know that you all have asked about the financing end of this, and of course with the CBDCs and all this stuff. In 1973, Nixon took us off of the gold standard. And with that, he sent Kissinger to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, to OPEC, and they set up what they called the petrodollar. In other words, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, and anybody that was going to buy oil in the world had to pay for it in US dollars. So countries were required to keep so much US money on hand, and that is what allowed us to spend more money than we have. You know how we're $33 trillion in debt? Well, the way that I understand it is when the government wants to spend more money that it doesn't have, it creates bonds, and it sells these bonds on the open market. And countries like China or India or different countries would buy these bonds. And it's a deal because they're buying it they're spending, and these numbers are not accurate. I'm just throwing them out there so you can understand the way that it works. But they would give $8,000 for a $10,000 bond, and it matures over time, just like buying a savings bond. And so it was advantageous to them to buy these because they could actually save money. And they had to use this money in order to buy oil. And so there was a demand for US dollars in the world. Um, since this has started, that demand for US dollars is slacking. In other words, we're not going to be able to just keep printing money at the rate we've been printing it because nobody's going to want to buy US bonds when the dollar is declining in the world. So, combined with what BRICS is doing, if they do come up with a world reserve currency, which they're trying to do, that they say is going to be backed in gold. I've told you all about how China, Russia, and a lot of countries have been buying massive amounts of gold over the last 2 to 3 years. This may be the end game as far for the US dollar, in that they will have this new world currency that the world will start using instead of using the dollar, which will cause a quicker decline of the dollar. As the dollar continues to lose its value, of course, things are going to go up. Inflation's going to go up. We don't know how it's all going to play out, but it could be really ugly. This article here, the United States witnesses 5.9 trillion vanish in wealth in 2022. It says in 2022, the United States experienced the largest decline in wealth compared to any other nation, with a reduction of 5.9 trillion. Additionally, the report unveiled that the North American and Europeans lost a combined 10.9 trillion in 2022. You know, I think that the next 15 months, and a lot of people have been saying this, but I tend to agree with them, that the next 15 months is really going to tell the tale here in the United States of what's going to happen as far as with our economy and whatnot. It's hard to predict it exactly how all this stuff is going to unfold, but you know, we've talked about it before, that there's a dam holding all this stuff back, and the dam's full now, and it's got holes in it, and it's leaking, and it's just going to take one little thing to cause a catastrophic failure, and it's just going to cascade on itself. You know, if we look at history, the Weimar Republic, Germany, prior to World War II, between the wars, World War I and World War II, they had what they called hyperinflation. And it got to the point where people were taking their paychecks home in wheelbarrows. And because the money was so worthless, you know, they were getting exorbitant amounts of money. I think, you know, they had like $10,000 bills, you know, in their, of course, in marks, Deutschmarks, you know. But a loaf of bread might cost you 5,000 Deutschmarks. And then the next day you went back to the store and that same loaf of bread was 8,000. You know, it was just, inflation was just feeding upon itself. So it could be, that's, you know, of course, we've all heard stories from our grandparents about the Depression, how things were here. Inflation wasn't out of control, but there was no jobs and no money. My grandfather talks about, you know, the first job that he had when him and grandma got married, he worked at a sawmill and he made a nickel a day. But he said for a nickel a day, he said you could buy enough rice and beans to feed the family on a nickel. But, you know, his farm, he gave $1 an acre for it, you know. And I thought, I always would ask him, because he would tell the story that the guy that sold him the land had a whole bunch of land right there around him that he wanted to sell him, a couple hundred acres. And Grandpa said $40 was a fortune. He said, when you're making a nickel a day, he said $40 is a fortune. He said, I couldn't even think that I could ever pay for, you know, come up with $40, you know. So it's different now than it was then. I think inflation is what's going to eat all our money up. This is some statistics. 69% of Americans in urban areas living paycheck to paycheck, 14 percentage points higher than suburban consumers. Go to the next slide. This is a map that shows the different areas. The western part of the United States is 64%, Midwest at 61%, the South, which we're considered in the South, at 60.5%, and the Northeast at 58.6%. If the economy does collapse, can you imagine how many people are going to be left homeless? How many people are going to not be able to buy food? You know, especially with this high percentage of people living paycheck to paycheck. And credit card debt has increased over $1 trillion in the last year. People are running out of money. You know, even though they say that inflation is under control and we're at the waning point of it, people just don't have any money. People are just tapped out. And of course, there's nothing, if they go to CBDCs, that's something that you all will, each individual person will have to make a choice whether or not you want to participate in that. But I don't believe there's anything inherently evil about a CBDC at this point. It's not the mark yet. But do you want the government all up in your business? Because they're going to know where you spend every penny of your money. They'll be able to trace it. They can almost do that now.
Yeah.
The only with debit cards, they can almost do that now. This will be the final part of it. Got a few more slides to get through here. This is something that I ran across that I thought it was hard for me to believe, to be honest with you. Shocking. Family-friendly activity, playful demon summoning. Tax dollar supported art center in the leftist state of Minnesota has held a family-friendly event, a session for playful demon summoning. This article was published August 16th. Next slide, Joseph. This comes from the article. It says the event, which took place at the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden, was part of the Walker Free First Saturdays program and featured artist Tamar Atun, who created demon traps. Families are invited to create a vessel to trap the demon that knows them best, perhaps the demon of overthinking, and then participate in playful ceremonies to summon and befriend their demon, the website explains. This was an actual event, folks, that took place, and it's just hard to believe that we're indulging in this kind of, it's dangerous. I was going to say nonsense, but it's not nonsense. It's extremely dangerous stuff. The National Education Association, the largest teachers union in the U.S., has issued guidance for the upcoming school year and the use of leftist activity symbols in public school classrooms. As part of their advice to teachers, they recommend violating district and state rules and hanging items such as pride flags and BLM flags. This is coming from the teachers union, folks. The NEA has been one of the primary driving forces behind the intrusion of woke ideology into public school settings. Around 97% of their political fundraising goes towards the Democratic candidates. They seem to be obsessed with the grooming of children into the leftist fold, with lessons focused on critical race theory, gender fluid propaganda, and socialism. If you want to know where the sudden surge in social justice cultism came from in terms of America's kids, leftist teachers and the NEA are to share much of the blame. I've said this before, but we've become a nation that's at war with its foundation. We have become a nation that's at war with God. And of course, finishing up in all this stuff, it's easy to get caught up in all this stuff and all the stuff that's going on, but we need to remain focused, and we get worried about all this different stuff, but the focus needs to be Jesus all the time. And of course, this is from Matthew 14, verses 27 through 31. And it's Peter walking on water with Jesus. And he says, "But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer. It is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous and was afraid and beginning to sink, he cried, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Again, we need to stand firm on the Bible and what the Bible says. We need to all be reading and studying all this stuff and stand firm in the Word, and not doubt. Jesus said that not one tittle will pass away. And if you look at that word, that the tittle, it best refers to dotting your I's and crossing your T's. That not one letter is going to pass away without being fulfilled. And, we're hurdling at all this stuff at a really fast pace, and it's really scary, but we just have to hang on to Jesus. Suicide rates right now are higher than they have ever been. In fact, if I remember correctly, the article that I read said that we have already surpassed this year the total number of last year, of 2022. And I think that's exactly a lot of it. People are having such a hard time dealing with everything that's happening. They don't know the Lord, and the world gets a hold of them. And you know, God didn't give us his word to scare us. He gave it to prepare us. We know what's coming. We know what's going to happen. We know where we're at. We know where we're going. You know, all we have to do is trust in him. And that sounds like an easy thing to do, but it's extremely hard, especially in the times that we're living in. You know, I don't know of anybody that is not under attack in some way, that the devil's not attacking. Our family, he's been hammering on us every which way he can, from sickness to all kinds of different things. You know, it's just chipping away constantly. And I think that's for everybody. So please pray for one another, love one another. You know, we've got to keep a hold of Jesus, and we got to keep a hold of one another. You know.